Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lady Dragon speaking. It is Wednesday, January 8th. It's 1:07 p.m. Sam is with me today. I hope you enjoyed the last keynote that I did concerning the disruptive technologies. Extremely interesting. I'm going to have to rewatch it. I'm going to have to look at all these companies very carefully and bring them to you. Bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que vous avez aimé mon dernier keynote avec les disruptive technologies. C'est extrêmement intéressant. C'est tellement intéressant qu'il va falloir que je le revisionne puis que je prenne note de toutes les compagnies qui ont mentionné. Il m'a sauvé énormément de temps, le monsieur. Je veux savoir exactement quelle compagnie, pourquoi. Ça va être super cool. Fait que, oui, c'est typique, oui, c'est typique, oui. Les chevreuils, ils sont ici aujourd'hui, là. Sam, il parle avec les chevreuils. Nos chevreuils sont ici aujourd'hui, fait que c'est super cool. Il neige, puis il y a des chevreuils. C'est comme on est dans un fairy tale. So my deers are here with me. So Sam is talking to the deers. It's like we're living in a fairy tale here. It's quite nice. Now we're going to do another one, okay? This one is called Safeguarding Innovation, okay? So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to talk about, but again, it's not long, only 29 minutes. So I'll talk to you after. Enjoy. Fait que là, encore là, on va regarder une autre keynote. Là, ça va être, c'est pas long, c'est juste 39 minutes. Ça va être concernant les Safeguarding Innovation. Je sais pas trop exactement ça va être quoi, là. C'est pas grave. On va s'éduquer. Fait qu'on se parle après. Here we go. Oui, sinon. C'est des petits pets, ouais.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our CS session on standards, innovation, and certifications. I'm Seon Deb, the Director of Insights at UL Standards and Engagement. As a global, independent standards development and advocacy organization, our work at UL centers around one core mission. That is creating practical solutions that are driven by safety science research. And we do so by convening experts around the world to tackle some of today's pressing safety challenges to develop consensus-based standards. But our work goes beyond developing standards as well. We engage with policymakers, we build partnerships, and we create models that advocate for policies to make the world safer and more sustainable. Today, I'm really excited to announce the release of our new report, which is the impact of standards and certification in ensuring consumer trust and innovation in the smart home sector. But before I dive into our findings for the report and welcome the panel on board, I'd like to send a big thank you to the Consumer Tech Association for partnering with us on this topic. The research presents highlights from our study, but also highlights several standards that UL develops and manages, but also standards that the Consumer Tech Association develops and manages as well. So what did our research find? Our new report draws from two comprehensive surveys, one of smart home device owners, about 1,200 US consumers, and 176 senior executives at technology and smart home companies. By combining the two perspectives, we lay out how standards and certifications create a virtuous cycle. As consumer trust grows, companies feel the confidence to innovate, which builds safer and more advanced technologies. So the key takeaways from our research is, first, standards and certifications are building market value by cultivating consumer trust. Second, leading smart home device makers are leveraging these standards as innovation accelerators. And third, and most importantly, companies are turning this into a competitive advantage for themselves. Let's look at the first theme about building market value. Our research reveals a compelling insight. Certification marks and labels now rival brand identity as the same trust marker for consumers, with a third of consumers say they completely trust certification marks and labels at the same level as brand reputation. This is on par with friends and family recommendations, but notably ahead of expert and user reviews. This is sending us a clear signal in terms of what the market is saying and what consumers are reacting to certification labels. Beyond consumers, let's look at the industry perspective as well. 93% of executives in our study said that they see certifications as an innovation driver, not as roadblocks or obstacles to innovating. And this is really translating into greater advantage for companies as they're integrating certifications and standards deeper into their R&D priorities. They're making it a core part of their development process, more importantly, and this is all translating to market value as well. 44% of senior executives say that certifications boost both their brand reputation as well as their competitive position. All of this really points to one clear conclusion, that standards have evolved from a technical requirement and a regulatory requirement into a genuine strategic asset. With that, I'd love to welcome the panel on board to discuss and delve really into this topic as well as the findings from our report. Please welcome on board Rebecca Zavin, CTO of Simply Safe, Carrie Harrisine, Senior Director of Tech and Standards from the CTA, Crystal Prey from the CSA, as well as Leslie Rohrbaugh, Head of Insights and Policy Analysis at UL Standards and Engagement. Welcome, panelists. For today's session, I'd love for us to explore 4 key areas for our audience. First, how are standards and certifications driving innovation while protecting consumers? Second, emerging technology, a topic near and dear to the show as well as in our work. How are standards adapting to these new requirements, specifically AI and IoT? And third, how are companies thinking about transforming, like we just saw in the findings, thinking about standards from a regulatory compliance to a trust driver, an innovation driver? And finally, how are these standards ultimately building market trust to allow consumers to feel confident in the technology they're buying? Leslie, I'd love to start with you in terms of talking about the relationship between standards and innovation. How do you see the role of engaging industry as well as consumers in developing effective standards?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, good morning, everyone. Nice to see everybody this morning. First, I'll start with a little bit of background about standards, specifically UL standards. UL standards have been around for over 120 years. The first UL standard was in 1903 for the tin-clad fire door. So standards have been around for a while, and they have helped industry throughout over, again, 120 years. Right now, UL has over 1,700 standards in our portfolio, and the way they're developed is through a consensus-based situation where we bring on multiple technical committees to hash out these standards, bring an unbiased standpoint, bring multiple perspectives into the room. Right now, we have over 4,000 technical committee members developing these standards. So I think that's really a good thing to note, just because it's not just a bias room, it's not just UL putting out standards, it's a group of manufacturers, consumers, supply chain professionals, and more coming together. What's great about these technical committees is that it really enables UL to collect input, review the standards, provide open discussion from a wide-ranging view of perspectives, and this really engages that whole ecosystem of standards. So I think that kind of illustrates that relationship because it's not just industry, again, developing standards, it's the consumers as well. I'll also put in a shameless plug. If you're interested in joining a technical committee, you can go to ulse.org for more information, because it is really important to have industry voices, consumer voices. Who's using these products? They should be at the table when deciding what the standards look like.
That's great, Leslie. Rebecca, I'd love for you to build on that. So, talking about this from a more macro scale to bringing it down to how individual companies really tackle it. How is, adherence to safety standards obviously is important to maintain a customer base that continues to, feel close to your brand. In what ways have safety standards sort of spurred innovation at Simply Safe?
I think it's a really rich area for Simply Safe because we have a couple of different surface areas where we touch safety standards. We have, we build consumer electronics products, so we talk about safety standards around those products. We build life safety sensing products like smoke detectors, so there's a sort of a special corner of that space. And we also have an in-house monitoring center, which is its own set of safety standards that it complies with. So a really good example, I think, is a certification we just recently qualified for, and we're one of the first companies to receive, so we're pretty excited. That's called alarm validation scoring. And what that is really an advancement to how monitoring centers like ours can communicate with 911 agencies and first responders. So when your Simply Safe alarm goes off, our monitoring center has some good information. We know your front door was opened. We know we might see motion on some of your motion sensors. And if you have opted in, your indoor cameras can actually, our monitoring agents can connect to those and see what's happening live and even have a two-way audio interaction. And with AVS, with this new standard, we can communicate that information more clearly to our partners and first responders. So rather than just a burglar alarm went off, we actually can say we validated that there are people present. We can say there's a threat to property. We can see that there's things are being stolen or damaged, and also that there's a threat to life or weapon present. And obviously, this makes our first responders it's a real upgrade for them in terms of how they can respond. It helps keep them safer, and for us, it also helps keep our users safer. So that's been a really amazing advancement. But on top of that, this October, we launched a new service called Active Guard Outdoor Protection. And with that, we really took the same concepts and extended it to our outdoor cameras. So now our monitoring agents can connect to your outdoor cameras and actually can start those interactions before someone has forced your front door. So we can hopefully deter those crimes before they happen, but all built on top of the same infrastructure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Carrie, I wonder if, kind of building off of that, again, zooming back out, looking at the technology industry as a whole, how do you see that dynamic sort of playing out, not just in the home security space, but really across the tech sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to say, especially here at CES, the phrase of standardization for innovation. As Rebecca just articulated, we're seeing a lot of amazing new technologies, but we know that we need industry best practices in place. If a consumer uses a brand new piece of technology and maybe doesn't have a great experience, they're probably going to be a little bit more hesitant to use the technology again in the future. And we all know that that's not what anybody here in this room wants. We want lots of technology in the hands of our consumers. So I really, and at CTA, through our 135 plus standards, like to think about is our standardization for innovation. Setting best practices together as an industry and then allowing innovators to grow and develop on top of that in order to continue to drive that conversation for innovation.
Yeah, Carrie, I think, that foundation of trust is really what our research also, finds out is that once you have that base layer of foundational sort of trust with consumers, they're willing to be more forgiving if there's slight glitches or performance issues, because they've built that relationship with the brand, right? Which kind of brings us to, well, how do you tackle that in emerging technologies, right? You have a faster sort of turnaround time in terms of proving yourself to the consumers. In terms of like how you're seeing the technology sector, what unique challenges do you see in developing standards for things like AI, right, which is moving at sort of breakneck speed?
Yeah, I mean, trust is so important, and I think we're seeing a lot of challenges, but I think a lot of opportunities when we look at standards for emerging technology. There's definitely a balance of when is the right time to jump in for standardization. You don't want to be too early, you don't want to be too late. I'm not going to sit here and say I think we have that perfectly figured out, but we're always kind of working on it and evolving it. But I think we really need to think about kind of fast to market standards, thinking about how we can iterate on standards to get very standards nerdy for just a moment, I promise just a moment, like to kind of think about shoulds and shalls. Is it something that we have to get done or something maybe we can start moving the needle forward a little bit at a time in a series of should statements versus mandated required statements? And I think this is going to be an evolving conversation. We are so excited to be tackling that on AI in our CTA standards program. We have 7 AI standards already to date with a huge portfolio focusing on AI in healthcare. So I'm hoping that we maybe be back at CES next year talking even a little bit more about what we've learned about how to kind of have this adaptive, reactive model when it comes to standards for emerging technology.
Yeah, I think, the point about kind of staying caught up to the trends, right, and developing standards as technology is evolving. Chris, I'd love to, hear your reflections on the Matter standard, right, certification. I see you have the lapel pin for Matter on today, so yeah, good job, repping that. It was clearly a major milestone in smart home last year at CES. It was everywhere, which is fantastic, I think, for the certificate itself. What lessons do you think like we could borrow or learn from the Matter rollout that could inform some of the more challenges that we're seeing in emerging tech?
Yeah, well, certainly. First, thanks for having me here. The main, I think the rest of the group up here talked about, iterating on standards. The one thing I want to add to that is we're very use case driven. So we think about like, okay, we're manufacturer. We don't have, consumers can't join our alliance, but very manufacturer driven. But so what is the use case that we want to deliver to consumers? And then that's something that we can also think about on the shoulds and shalls, simplify that. And another piece is that we iterate every 6 months. We've, at least for now, promised a new version of Matter every 6 months. And so that's allowed us to create a lot of new device types and focus on those, what we call MVP, the minimum viable products, for each of those different use cases as we go forward. And then also see how consumers take to version 1 and then adapt to that as well. So that iterate quickly, I don't want to say fail quickly, but there's a little bit of that certainly going on as well. And we can see which standards are being taken up by our members as well, and then adapt in that way. So I think that's the piece that I like to layer on to what was already said here.
Sure, yeah. And Rebecca, so staying at sort of the topic of being at the cutting edge of as things are coming, you'd mentioned a couple of new features and services from SimpliSafe's portfolio from last year. How is the team sort of navigating this frontier? Like, how do you see integrating AI tools or detection mechanisms into products sort of going forward, right?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of movement in the AI space. I think we have a lot of jobs that could more and more things that could be done by AI, and we're going to see that rolling out over the next 5 years. And I think that we're going to want to look for the same assurances for consumers around safety, around those things, and understanding of it. And it's a very complicated space. Mm-hmm. So we're treading carefully. We really believe at SimpliSafe, as part of our values, in the combination of people and technology is what we say. So when we bring some of these features to life, there's always a component with where we bring our human monitoring agents into the loop to make sort of final decisions and interactions. And we think that that's both helpful in terms of how we integrate new technologies, but also you really can't beat having someone with you in a moment of crisis. So it's kind of a part of our values.
Sure. And a lot of the standards and certifications that we are kind of talking about so far, a lot of it's adopted voluntarily by companies, right? You're doing it to ensure and again build market trust. You're doing it so you can create that foundation on which to innovate. Which brings us to the conversation about, well, voluntary adoption is good, but sometimes it's not so voluntary, right? You're made to comply with certain regulations. So, kind of shifting the conversation to regulatory compliance, particularly how compliance doesn't have to be this this skid stop, right? It's not it can be a driver of innovation. So I'm wondering, how in your role as CTO at SimpliSafe, like how do you view turning compliance into a competitive advantage for your company?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, I think there's two pieces. The biggest thing is, on the one hand, we need to prepare for it. So I think really understanding from the get-go how to engage. So when we did this new alarm validation standard, we had a product manager at SimpliSafe who was on the committee for that. So we knew what was coming, we could engage with it, we could help define the standard, we could maybe fail fast or make changes if there's changes that need to happen. I think participating. I think both sides have to meet there, because I think companies need to know what's coming, need to get involved in the right things, need to bring forward the new technology that's gonna sort of influence these standards, and then this obviously the standards bodies need to come along as well. So I think if we look, just as an example, if we look at some of the standards in the space, they might require stuff like on-prem services, back-end services. And if we look, I think that some of that goes back to a time where the alternative would be a colo data center down the road with sort of unknown security, reliability. But it probably today, it would be hard to beat the reliability and security of a really well-designed service running in multi-region in the public cloud. And so we have to, the standards have to move, companies have to participate in the standards. And it's a scary space, I think, when you're collaborating with, as a company, with maybe your competitors in order to help define a standard.
Right.
It can be unnerving.
And I think that brings, Chris, I think that positions you perfectly, right? You're sort of at that crosshair, at that crossroads of multiple different entities, either pushing and kind of, or encouraging rather adoption of standards and certification. I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I don't know how much I have to add, but that's exactly what matters based on is very much, and it comes back to that shoulds and shalls, the minimum viable product. What are companies willing to do today? What are companies still capable of innovating on top of, and still providing a really good differentiated service to their customers? So it's all of that put together into what a standard that companies are going to be willing to adopt. And so as head of technology on my side, I'm always like, yeah, we have to standardize all of this. Like, that's what consumers want. But no, right? Like, we need to make money. If we're not making money,
right,
then we're not going to sell anything, and consumers are going to get zero, right? And so we have to balance that really tightly and figure out what's good. And then often, this is the iteration piece. Maybe we did get it wrong. Because if we standardize too much, we can't kind of, I say the expression, put the poop back in the cow. I probably should have come up with a better one. So start lower and then iterate. Raising the bar is key, and making sure that okay, we all wanted the standard really low, but you know what? We all do this exactly the same. So let's standardize that. That's the way we want to raise the bar.
Sure. And how do you see the role of sort of this proactive engagement, right? It's not necessarily this thing that where something happens and you're reacting to it, but you kind of see around the corner, right? Well, you can sense this is coming, particularly with emerging technology. How does the role of CSA, sort of proactively engaging with the industry or regulators, kind of push the envelope forward?
Yeah, so mostly for Matter, that is that use case-based piece, right? Like, what is it that we want to do for consumers, and where can we put standards along the way? For our product security piece, we work really closely with governments. We've engaged with the European Commission. We've spoken to the people at the FCC and all of the pieces that they're trying to put in place, and we want our standard to meet the requirements of all that. And UL has been named the lead there, and so that's something that I think is key. It's one of those places that you mentioned before where it's voluntary might not work, right? We probably need governments to say, this is what you should be doing, and this is where the bar is going to be set in Europe. And maybe Germany might say, okay, that's the bar, but actually it's a little bit higher here. And then the US will do something slightly different. And so we need an umbrella standard that manufacturers can point to and say, okay, that meets the requirements for everywhere I sell in the world. And so I don't have to worry about all those regulations all across the world as well. So it's two-way on that one.
Sure. And it's a tricky balancing act, right? And Leslie, our report sort of highlights that balancing act, right? Where, going one way or the other, you're not necessarily producing a quality product. What you're really is just kind of checking or ticking boxes, right? So how do you sort of see consumer and industry perspectives specifically, particularly the end user, consumers in this case, informing that relationship between regulation and innovation, right? So consumers want the latest, fastest gadgets, while sometimes they may not be the safest things for them to be using, right?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting dynamic, right? You have the consumers on one side, regulators on the other, that might not understand what standards are. So part of the role of UL Standards as engagement is to work with local policymakers, both at the state and local levels, to help them understand why standards are important. This might alleviate some of the regulation that comes with products, allowing innovation to thrive. Part of what we do at UL is we run market research studies, we do economic forecasting, we size various populations that are using these various devices so we can help local legislators understand how this affects their community. For better or for worse, consumers do influence change and drive change quite a bit. So if we're able to proactively understand who's using the product, how they're using the product, how this is impacting the community, the cost to communities if a hazard occurs, that really helps influence legislators at that level to say, well, hey, standards do matter. One example is this past year, we've been doing a lot of work in New York City around the e-mobility space. This room has probably heard some issues with e-mobility, e-scooter, e-bike fires occurring with charging batteries and uncertified batteries. And what we've been doing is providing some of the localized data to legislators so they understand who's charging these batteries, where they're charging these batteries. If a fire were to occur, what is the cost, both to local resources as well as to physical resources, whether it's an apartment building or home, loss of life, et cetera, the really scary stuff. We're able to put numbers behind that. And without numbers, it's hard to paint that picture. But I think legislators are really starting to grasp these various issues if you pull that data behind it. So again, consumers drive change, but we also have to be almost a middleman in that and proactively engage with legislators so they really understand this value of safety and again, how it impacts their local communities.
You know, I think one of the ways that we've really used all those facts as well as arguments as well as our deeper safety science research is translating the more sciencey stuff into things that are relevant to people, right? So it's about cohesive communicating to both industry and consumers. And again, it really falls back to the idea of trust, right? So kind of continuing, kind of building off of that, how do you, sort of effectively, how do we effectively communicate the value of certifications to consumers in terms of making them understand why should they trust this device, right?
Yeah, I think we've seen an advancement in how much consumers really want to know about their products. Luckily, we're in this world where e-commerce is pretty much the most popular channel for a lot of purchasing decisions, and through e-commerce versus physical point of purchase sales, you're able to display a lot more information. So if you're able to communicate, yes, this has a certification, yes, this has a safety mark, this is a safe product, it's not going to blow up in your hands or in your ears, that's definitely a solid move and should be part of that project page. And of course, social media is an ongoing influence in our lives. We see a lot of social influencers out there starting to take hold of standards, believe it or not, and starting to say, yes, this is a safe product and this is why as well. And so I think that, those are two very basic ways we can communicate that. But again, just consumer education, I feel like we talk about that in every industry, talk it ear to ear, but it's no different in this case as well. We just have to keep hitting that home. I think another area outside of just the consumers and end users, there's a lot of folks getting into this space. So there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of new organizations that might have no idea what standards are. So also educating those newer manufacturers of these products is definitely critical, because at the end of the day, they want to protect their brand. And if they're able to show that their product has this certification behind it, they're more likely to be invested in, potentially purchased, but also, given funding to continue their good work, because those investors know that they do have a safe product because of these rigorous standards that are put in place.
Yeah, and again, right, so faith and brand, right? So Rebecca, for Simply Safe's perspective, I mean, half of the word is safe, which sort of lends to the the kind of the topic is that how do you how is safety standards essentially strengthened your brand, right? And I think even more importantly, well, how do you sort of measure that relationship with your customers? Like how do you measure that bond that Simply Safe has built with their customers based on trust?
Yeah, I think yes, I think it's a really important. It's extra important for us because we're in the life safety business. So I just think as a consumer, kind of to echo something that Leslie said, I do think these certifications, they provide you with an assurance that maybe you once would have gotten from your local electronics store. So you might have known your local electronics store wasn't going to sell you a scooter that was going to light your garage on fire. And today, so much of this purchasing is happening through online marketplaces that are pretty much a Wild West. And so I think really consumers need that. It's a huge benefit to consumers to be able to know that when you buy a product, you can be assured that it's not going to start an electrical fire. And I think for sure you want to know if you're buying a smoke detector that it's going to detect fires in your home. And we are fortunate at Simply Safe that we tend to have long relationships with our customers, and we can see very clearly over time how important trust is. I mean, we're really a product that is kind of invisible to you until you need it desperately. So it's extra critical to us that we get these few moments to show what we're capable of. So really to make sure that trust is there is really important. And it applies both to the products we sell into your home, but also to our monitoring centers. Because people you're bringing a camera into your home, maybe an indoor camera and outdoor cameras, and you can be assured that those cameras are monitored by our certified monitoring agents and our certified monitoring centers, and that reliability and quality are taken very seriously, along with security and privacy. And so I think it really provides consumers with, really gives them a clear trust, where I think otherwise you could go buy cameras from an online marketplace. It's a total unknown.
Right. And it's about the physical safety of the product itself. Leslie alluded to fires that we've seen other product categories, but it's also about the data privacy, the safety of, well, where's my information that's getting recorded? How is that ending up? And then Chris, sort of looking at the broader ecosystem, right? That trust and that concept of safety translates to being able to, well, if I buy multiple different smart home products, are they going to be able to talk to each other, right? So if I'm investing my money into sort of smart home products, I want my thermostat to talk to the sensors and all that. So how do you see interoperability standards, essentially? How do they build market trust as well?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, interoperability is really the whole reason of our existence. It's the ability to make a device that would work in all the different ecosystems. And so, that being our sort of raison d'etre, I think it's critical for where it's needed, that's what consumers want. And also to be able to if I bought these devices, and I want to switch my ecosystem, that interoperability also buys that. So it's somewhat of an insurance plan to a degree for that. And so I think that's another piece there. But then also layering on safety in terms of the smoke detectors, water leak sensors, those kinds of, say smart home safety sensors. I think that's also the key of, we're not UL, we don't really, key on the actual safety of that device, but the efficacy of that device. It has to do what it says it does. And so that's the level that we put it at. And that's another place where we let brands differentiate as well.
And then, on this topic of sort of performance and standards that draw, kind of sort of guarantee and bolster those performance metrics, Carrie, from your perspective, looking at emerging technologies, that I think is where the trick is even harder to sort of pull off, right? So how do you sort of see, the sort of the movement of continuing to build trust as well as maintaining it while you're shipping out brand new products that maybe have algorithms that detect, well, is it leaking somewhere? Who to sort of route that information to? How do you sort of see standards kind of keeping up with that?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a broken record, but I go back to standardization for innovation, because it also really helps create categories. And one of the great standards examples that we have at CTA is over-the-counter hearing aids. So many of you might know that that's a category product that you can definitely see here at the show on display, but didn't exist 2 years ago. And the FDA regulation that created over-the-counter hearing aids is underpinned by a CTA performance requirement. So it kind of does that connection of regulatory compliance with innovative standards that created an entire new product category as well. And so I think if we look at this and think about standards in that kind of in our toolkit in that regard of ensuring we have good products in the market, but ensuring that we're creating categories for innovation on top of that, it's going to be a really exciting future.
That's great. At every CES panel session, I think, or talks, we talk about, well, what's coming next, right? It's a show about the future. Carrie, if you could just add on to that from the industry's perspective, the consumer technology industry's perspective, what should we be preparing for? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like?
I mean, 3 to 5 feels really big. Maybe
Let's
like
do
1
to 2
to
years
18
then.
months. No, I honestly think when we think about standards, we really think, to go back to an earlier point, about adaptability. I think we're going to really, from a standardization perspective, need to kind of rethink our model and make sure that our standards are reacting to the same speed that our technology and innovation enhancements are happening. Whether that's in the real nerdy world of processes and procedures, which I can talk to anybody about for many, many hours. But really, I think more thinking about that iteration of technology. I don't know if we want to say failing fast, maybe succeeding slow. We can spin it into a little bit more of a positive. But I think that iteration and adaptiveness is going to be something we absolutely have to integrate into this conversation to ensure we have the innovation coming in the future.
That's great. And Rebecca, I know you mentioned a couple of brand new sort of features and services that were rolled out by SimpliSafe. Without giving away your portfolio over the next few years, obviously.
Sure.
In general, like what should we be expecting from companies like SimpliSafe, but also that security space in general, kind of looking ahead, especially integrating any kind of these new detection technologies or algorithms going forward?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more integrations. So sensors taken holistically across a whole different set of bringing them together to bring more intelligence. I think that intelligence is going to involve machine learning algorithms, and we're going to see a lot of advancements in that space. And it's going to be, I think, super interesting. There are a lot of jobs that can already be done by those, jobs that the systems do today, that can already be done by some of those machine learning algorithms. And I think we're going to see a lot of features get delivered to our customers, like really what is available to a SimpliSafe customer who might be a little bit cost conscious is going to really get a huge upgrade from that versus what maybe today is only available if you imagine you could pay for a private security guard to patrol your yard. That's a whole different level. But I think we're going to see, as we bring some of these technologies, it's really going to raise the bar on what's available.
That's excellent. And Chris, I know, again, going back to sort of Matter in year 2 of real public, full-on public visibility, beyond just that, like what other gaps that are left to be sort of addressed? Of course there are, but how do you see sort of the next few years standards and sort of certification sort of addressing those gaps in safety going forward?
Yeah, so from a device perspective, cameras was one that we don't support. We didn't support in the beginning. We've kind of been working on it for quite a long time now. So that is one that we're continuing to work on. It will not be in our next release, but it's likely to be in the one after that, or really, in that sort of medium time frame, let's say. And then something similar but different that I'm sort of excited by. We call it ambient sensing, but it's like ways to put into the data model interesting things you might know, right? Like if you're a camera, maybe you could detect how many people are in the room, and then someone else downstream can consume that. Like maybe your HVAC has to run a little harder to account for that, or maybe your hot water heater is going to adjust for that. Like, oh, you have guests over, maybe they're going to take some extra showers or something like that. I don't know, I'm making that up. But then also, has someone fallen and not gotten up? Just detected and then can be acted upon, from someone else in the data model. And so that's something that I'm particularly interested in that we're working on, have been working on for a while, and we'll start to be adding that. And it's all independent of, like, could be cameras that detect it, could be other IR models that figure these things out, and that just gets put into the data model.
Yeah, and I love the way you describe, right, this concept of sort of ambient sensing. This has been that promise of the smart home, I think from the very inception, right? I think that's what we, at least in our minds, consumers had it, and it's good to see that progression happening year after year and kind of building up to it. Leslie, bring us home, as they say, how do you see both standards in the smart home space, but also the larger portfolio of areas that we at UL Standards and Engagement look at? What should we be expecting from emerging tech going forward?
Yeah, great question to end on, of course. I see 2 things. One is not a new theme within the standards development space. It's the harmonization of standards. We talked about that quite a bit. Innovation is not slowing down. Standards development should not slow down based on who is publishing the standard, whether it's UL, CTA, other organizations. If you look at the report that Sayan previewed at the beginning of this talk, it's on ulsc.org. You can download it for free, FYI, please do. There's a beautiful graphic in there of the smart home, and you see how CTA has standards in some places, how UL has some standards in the other places, but it's that harmonization of that ecosystem as a whole that needs to continue to thrive to not impede innovation. So I see that theme as one. The second, I mentioned it earlier, but it's that proactive engagement with the end user, studying the end user behavior, getting ahead of some of these safety hazards is going to be critical as we proceed with innovation. Again, because it's moving so quickly, there's going to be use cases that we didn't predict 3 years ago, let alone 3 days ago sometimes. We're in this world that consumers love to be able to modify and customize their products, again, for better or for worse. So being able to predict some of these behaviors, make sure the components within devices themselves are certified to protect that end user, that creates some of the potential bad user cases, if you will, with some of these products, which again will allow innovation to thrive.
Excellent. Thank you all. I know at the top of the panel session sort of laid out the key objectives that we would address, and I always like when panels wrap it up so people know, well, did they actually talk about the topics that we're supposed to be doing? So, panelists, keep me honest. So before we wrap up, I think the three takeaways from today's discussion really has been that standards and certifications really evolved from just compliance requirements to really strategic drivers of innovation, right? So companies are taking charge of their own sort of destiny there. And they're doing so because consumer trust, again, as our research shows, is really that foundational layer upon which innovation is sort of built. And then lastly, companies that are integrating certification early into their development are seeing significant competitive advantages, as we heard from Rebecca's case and Simply Safe, but also the broader perspective from Carrie and Chris as well. Thank you again for all of your valuable insights and your time and attending. Thank you to the audience for being here. Like Leslie mentioned, the full report is available on our website at ulsc.org, but you can also scan the QR code on the screen over there to grab it. So thank you again for joining us today.
Well, they cut this short press. Again, another great keynote. So I'm saying hello to everybody. Very, very, very interesting conversation. I have a lot to say about that, but first of all, for those who doesn't know who UL is, let me show it to you. Let's cut from here. Sam, sit down, please. So this is UL. This is actually a company, like Leslie said, that was that started in 1903. So they're not new to all this. And yeah, this is something actually, I don't buy product that don't have certification from you, especially electronic stuff, from a UL, exactly for that reason it can blow up, and that's not a joke. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est vraiment intéressant. Puis UL, c'est une compagnie de réputation, puis c'est CTA. CTA, c'est le Consumer Technology Association. C'est eux autres qui mettent CIS, la conférence, OK? Puis c'est ça que Leslie a expliqué, là, la dame de... Attends une seconde, j'ai tout ça ici, là. C'est ça qu'on a vu, les personnes qui ont parlé, là. La dame qui a parlé, là, de UL, c'était Leslie Robot. C'est elle qui a tout expliqué, tout ça. Puis c'est bien intéressant. Comment qu'il expliquait qu'il fallait faire le standard avec le CTA, puis avec eux autres. So it was very interesting. She has to do certification of products with combination with CTA and everything. And also something else that they touch upon, and I thought it was extremely interesting because it shows how the Oriental people, the Oriental companies and the Occidental companies doesn't think the same. Okay. In the see, that's safeguarding the thing by USC. In the West, this is how the companies think. We're gonna interkill each other. you're better than me, I'm going to kill you. Okay? Killing the sense that they want the company bankrupt. So they can be a monopoly. Okay? L'Ouest puis l'Est pensent carrément différent dans les façons de gérer les compagnies. Les compagnies de l'Ouest, ils ont la mentalité, OK? Ceux qui gèrent les compagnies de l'Ouest, ils ont la mentalité que s'il y a un compétiteur, il veut tuer le compétiteur, OK? À l'opposé de l'Est, c'est pas la même sorte de choses. Eux autres, ils ont la mentalité que... Je vais donner un exemple. C'est le meilleur exemple. Mettons, quand les VCR sont tombés sur le marché, bon, les compagnies de l'Ouest sont essayées de... Sam, veux-tu me lâcher, s'il vous plaît? Ils essaient de s'entretuer. À l'opposé de l'Est, ils s'entraident. Bon, on va développer le meilleur VCR, la base, la meilleure. On va faire certifier le VCR. Puis après, on va faire nos propres features nous autres mêmes. C'est le même qui pensent, les Orientaux, et non les Occidentaux. Ça, c'est une grosse différence entre les compagnies de l'Est et de l'Ouest de la planète. So, I'm going to explain this for you to understand very clearly that there are very different ways they run their companies in the East and the West, okay? The Oriental companies, if I'm going to give you the VCR as an example, if they have a company that they're inventing a product, example, VCR is a perfect example for that again. They will work together and they will develop the basic of a VCR the best that they can do. Then after that, they're going to go their separate ways and add different features. So may the best company win. That's their attitude on every single thing in the Oriental. As opposed to the West. They want to bankrupt the other company, fight with the other company. See, that's why it's very, very different. Very different. Very different. So, that was very interesting. Now, we're going to go do another one. And I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay? Thank you for joining. Donc, on va aller faire un autre keynote. Je reviens à peu près dans 5 minutes. Je vais voir qu'est-ce que je vais choisir pour notre prochain keynote. Merci d'être venu. On se voit bientôt. Thank you for joining. I'll see you soon.